The biting Montana wind carried the whispers as Deanna Kincaid trudged through the muddy street of Copper Creek, clutching her worn shawl tighter around her shoulders. 3 months a widow, and all she had left were the whispers, the pitying looks, and the crushing weight of her family's disappointment pressing down on her like the darkening sky above. "There she goes again, poor thing," came a voice from the general store porch. "No skills to speak of." Her husband did everything. Deanna kept her eyes fixed on the rutted road ahead, pretending not to hear. The year 1875 was proving harder than she could have imagined. At 26, she was supposed to have a secure future, not be returning to her brother's homestead with nothing but a handful of coins and the clothes on her back. The Hawkins Mining Company had paid what they called a generous settlement after Thomas's death in the cave in barely enough to cover his burial and outstanding debts. What remained wouldn't last the winter. Deanna had sold their small cabin on the outskirts of town just yesterday, the final thread connecting her to the life they'd built together. "Diana," her sister-in-law Martha's sharp voice cut through her thoughts as Deanna approached the farmhouse that had once been her childhood home. "You're tracking mud everywhere. For heaven's sake, haven't you learned to wipe your boots?" Deanna obediently scraped her boots on the iron bar beside the door before stepping inside. The farmhouse kitchen was warm and fragrant with baking bread, but the atmosphere chilled as she entered. "I've prepared the small room off the back porch," Martha said without looking up from her kneading. "It's not much, but it'll have to do." "Thank you," Deanna murmured, knowing her brother Samuel had likely argued against taking her in at all. As if summoned by her thoughts, Samuel appeared in the doorway, his expression a mixture of resignation and irritation. "Got your things settled at Widow Peterson's place?" "Yes," Deanna answered. "She was kind enough to store what little I kept." Samuel nodded curtly. "You can help Martha with the cooking and mending. The children need looking after too. You'll earn your keep that way." "Of course," Deanna said quietly, though her heart sank. She'd hoped for a few days to grieve properly before assuming new duties. "Don't know what Thomas was thinking," Samuel muttered, more to Martha than to Deanna. "Man knew mining was dangerous work. Should have taught you something useful before he got himself killed." Deanna bit her tongue against the defense that rose immediately. Thomas had taught her to read the stars, to appreciate poetry, to dream of adventures they'd never have. He'd loved her completely for 7 years, but Samuel wouldn't consider any of that useful. "She'll learn," Martha said with a sigh. "Though heaven knows I have enough to do without teaching a grown woman what she should already know." Deanna slipped away to the small back room, barely more than a converted storage space with a narrow cot and a hook on the wall for her clothes. Through the thin walls, she could still hear them. "Never did have a practical bone in her body," Samuel was saying. "Pa spoiled her, letting her have all those books. What good are books to a woman? Just fills their heads with nonsense." "We'll put her to work," Martha assured him. "Though between us, I don't know if she's worth the extra mouth to feed." Deanna pressed her palms against her eyes, willing the tears not to fall. She'd cried enough in the past 3 months to last a lifetime. Crying wouldn't change anything. It wouldn't bring Thomas back. It wouldn't give her skills she didn't have. It wouldn't make her family see her as anything but a burden. The next morning came too early, with Martha rapping sharply on her door before dawn. "Up with you now, cows won't milk themselves." Deanna had never milked a cow in her life. Thomas had kept them in town where he could be close to the mine. She'd bought milk from the general store like any town dweller, but today she would learn because she had no choice. The cow, a massive brown beast with accusing eyes, seemed to sense her inexperience and shifted restlessly as Deanna approached with the milking stool. "You've got to be firm," Martha instructed impatiently after watching Deanna's tentative attempts. "Good heavens, it's like you've never used your hands before." By the time breakfast was ready, Deanna's fingers were cramped and her back ached. She'd managed to get some milk, though not nearly as much as Martha deemed acceptable. Her brother's 4 children stared at her curiously over their porridge, no doubt having heard their parents' assessment of their useless aunt. "After breakfast, you'll help with the washing," Martha announced. Then there's mending to be done, vegetables to be preserved, and the chickens need tending. Deanna nodded, forcing a smile. I'm grateful for the opportunity to learn, Samuel snorted. Learn at your age. Most girls know these things before they're 12. The days bled into weeks, each one a grueling reminder of her inadequacies. Deanna tried God knew she tried, but nothing she did met Samuel or Martha's standards. The washing was never scrubbed enough, the mending too visible, the bread undercooked or burnt. The children were sent to her with torn clothes and skinned knees, then whisked away if she showed them the slightest kindness beyond practical care. You'll spoil them, Martha warned when she found Deanna telling the youngest a story. They need to learn the value of hard work, not waste time with fairy tales. October gave way to November, and the first snow dusted the hills surrounding Copper Creek. Deanna's hands, once soft and unmarked, were now chapped and raw from lye soap and constant work. Each night she collapsed onto her cot, too exhausted even for tears. On a bitter Tuesday morning, Martha announced that Deanna would go to town for supplies. Samuel needs help with the barn roof, and I can't leave the preserving. Try not to dawdle and don't forget anything on the list. Deanna accepted the carefully written list and the small pouch of coins with relief. A trip to town meant a few hours away from the constant criticism, even if it meant braving the piercing wind. Copper Creek had grown since Deanna was a girl. The silver and copper mines had brought prosperity to some, though Thomas had never struck it rich. The main street now boasted a proper hotel, 3 saloons, a bank, and Whitaker's general store where Martha insisted she shop, despite Mr. Whitaker's notorious habit of overcharging. Deanna tied the horse to the hitching post outside the store, patting its neck affectionately before heading inside. The warmth hit her immediately, along with the familiar sense of coffee, leather, and dried goods. Mr. Whitaker was helping another customer, so Deanna began gathering items from Martha's list, carefully calculating the cost of each to ensure she stayed within budget. "Madam, you might want to move aside." The deep voice startled her, and Deanna nearly dropped the sack of flour she was examining. She turned to find herself looking up quite a ways up at a tall man in a worn duster, his face partially shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat. "I beg your pardon," she murmured, stepping aside. The stranger reached past her for a tin of tobacco, and as he did, his hat tipped back enough for Deanna to see his face clearly. He was younger than she'd initially thought, perhaps 30, with a strong jaw darkened by several days' stubble and eyes the color of the summer sky. A thin scar ran along his right cheekbone, ending just below his eye. "Thank you kindly," he said, tipping his hat before moving toward the counter. Diana returned to her shopping, only half listening as Mr. Whitaker engaged the stranger in conversation. "Passing through, Mr. Grayson." "No, sir, looking to stay a while. Heard there might be work at the Henderson ranch." "Jackson Grayson, isn't it? Worked for the Prescotts over in Wyoming Territory." "That's right." "Well, Henderson's always looking for good hands this time of year, losing men to the mines all the time." Deanna approached the counter with her basket, waiting patiently while Mr. Whitaker totaled the stranger's purchases. When it was her turn, the shopkeeper's friendly expression cooled noticeably. "Mrs. Kincaid, how are you settling in with your brother's family?" "Well enough, thank you," Deanna answered, placing her items on the counter, shame about Thomas. "Good man." Mr. Whitaker began tallying her purchases with exaggerated care. "Your brother's a fine customer, always pays on time." Deanna felt her cheeks warm. The implication was clear. Samuel's credit was good, but she herself was suspect. "I have coin today, Mr. Whitaker." She placed Martha's list on the counter alongside the items she'd gathered. Mr. Whitaker studied it, then looked up with an expression of false concern. "I'm afraid the price of sugar's gone up since your sister-in-law made this list. Mining company supply wagons have been delayed by the weather." Deanna bit her lip. Martha would be furious if she returned without everything on the list, but the amount he was quoting would leave nothing for the coffee beans. "I see," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "Perhaps I'll take half the amount of sugar then." Mr. Whitaker shook his head sorrowfully. Can't break up the packages, Mrs. Kincaid. Company policy. From the corner of her eye, Deanna noticed the stranger Jack Grayson had paused by the door, watching the exchange with undisguised interest. Then I'll have to return without the coffee, Deanna said, straightening her shoulders. Martha will have to understand. Or you could accept that the price I quoted you is highway robbery, came Jack Grayson's voice from behind her. He strode back to the counter, setting down his purchases. Sugar hasn't gone up anywhere else in the territory, Whitaker. Not with the railroad bringing supplies regular as clockwork. Mr. Whitaker's face reddened. This isn't your concern, Grayson. Maybe not, Jackson agreed amiably, but I've got a particular dislike for men who try to cheat widows. He turned to Deanna. Madam, I'd recommend Wilson's store down the street. Prices are fair and the coffee's better. Deanna hesitated, torn between embarrassment at needing rescue and irritation at Mr. Whitaker's dishonesty. Martha specifically said, "Your Martha likely doesn't know she's being overcharged," Jackson interrupted. "No offense intended, but Whitaker here has been playing this game for years." Mr. Whitaker's expression turned thunderous. "Now see here, no, you see here," Jackson said, his voice still pleasant but with steel underneath. "The lady will take her business elsewhere, and you might consider adjusting your pricing before word gets around that you're gouging the grieving." Deanna gathered her basket, leaving the items on the counter. "I believe I will visit Wilson's. Thank you for your assistance, Mr. Grayson." Outside, Deanna paused to catch her breath, unsure whether to be grateful or mortified. Jack Grayson emerged a moment later, his expression apologetic. "I hope I didn't overstep, madam. Some men think a woman on her own is easy pickings." "Thank you for your intervention," Deanna said formally, "though I'm not sure how I'll explain this to my sister-in-law." Jackson studied her for a moment. "Would it help if I accompanied you to Wilson's?" "I can vouch for the price difference if there's any question later." Deanna considered refusing, but the thought of facing Martha's disappointment alone made her hesitate. "That's very kind, Mr. Grayson." "Jack," he corrected with a smile that transformed his weathered face. "Only my ma called me Jackson, and only when I was in serious trouble." Despite herself, Deanna found her lips quirking upward. "I'm Deanna Kincaid. Pleased to meet you properly, Mrs. Kincaid." "It's just Miss now," Deanna said, the familiar pang accompanying the words, "or Deanna if you prefer." They walked together to Wilson's, where Deanna found everything on Martha's list at prices significantly lower than Whitaker had quoted. Jack helped her load the supplies into the wagon, then stood back, hat in hand. "Will you be coming to town again soon?" Deanna shook her head. "I don't know." "Martha usually does the shopping. Today was unusual." Jack nodded, replacing his hat. "Well, if you do, perhaps we'll cross paths again." "Perhaps," Deanna agreed, though she doubted it. Martha would be furious enough about the change in stores without adding an unexpected male acquaintance to the equation. She was right. Upon her return, Martha examined each purchase with tight-lipped disapproval. "Wilson's?" she demanded, noting the unfamiliar packaging. "I specifically said Whitaker's." Deanna explained the price discrepancy as calmly as she could, showing Martha how much more she'd been able to purchase with the same amount of money. Rather than being pleased, Martha seemed almost insulted. "So now you think you know better than me. After all these years keeping this household running, some stranger convinces you I don't know how to shop properly." "That's not what I meant," Deanna protested. "He simply pointed out that Mr. Whitaker was charging more than he," Samuel interrupted, entering the kitchen. "What man are you talking about?" Deanna explained about Jack Grayson, watching Samuel's expression darken with each word. "You let some drifter tell you how to spend our money," Samuel demanded. "Some saddle tramp looking for work talked you into defying Martha's instructions." "He was being helpful," Deanna said, her voice small even to her own ears. "Helpful?" Samuel snorted. "Men like that are only helpful when they want something. Did it occur to you that Wilson might be giving him a cut for bringing in business, or that he might have less honorable intentions?" "Samuel," Deanna gasped, shocked at the insinuation. "Don't Samuel me," her brother snapped. "You've always been naive to the point of foolishness. It's why Pa worried about you so. No common sense." Martha laid a restraining hand on her husband's arm. What's done is done. At least she got everything on the list. She turned to Deanna. But in the future, you'll do exactly as instructed. No deviations, no listening to strangers. Is that clear? Yes, Martha, Deanna murmured, turning away to hide the flush of humiliation. That night, lying on her narrow cot, Deanna stared at the rough-hewn ceiling and allowed herself to remember Jack Grayson's kind eyes and the way he'd stood up for her without hesitation. It had been a long time since anyone had defended her, longer still since anyone had treated her as though her thoughts and feelings mattered. Thomas had been kind in his way, but he'd never truly seen her as an equal. He'd indulged her love of books as one might indulge a child's fancy for sweets harmless but ultimately frivolous. When she'd suggested helping with the household accounts, he'd laughed and patted her head. "You worry about making our home pretty, darling. I'll handle the serious matters." And now she was paying for that arrangement with her dignity and independence. 2 weeks passed before Deanna had another chance to go to town. This time, it was urgent. Samuel's youngest had developed a fever, and Martha needed medicine from the doctor. Deanna volunteered immediately, grateful for any escape from the increasingly suffocating atmosphere of the farmhouse. "Go straight to Dr. Emmett's office," Martha instructed, pressing coins into Deanna's palm. "Then straight back, no detours." The implication was clear: no visits to Wilson's store, and certainly no conversations with helpful strangers. Copper Creek was bustling when Deanna arrived, the street crowded with wagons and riders. A cattle sale at the stockyards had brought ranchers from miles around, along with the usual complement of cowboys, gamblers, and those hoping to separate the newly paid ranch hands from their wages. Deanna made her way carefully through the throng, keeping her head down. Dr. Emmett's office was mercifully quiet, the doctor himself available immediately. "Just a childhood fever," he assured her after hearing her description of little Joseph's symptoms. "Nothing to worry about, but this tonic will help bring it down. Make sure he drinks plenty of water." Clutching the small brown bottle, Deanna stepped back onto the boardwalk and directly into the path of 3 cowboys who'd clearly been enjoying the hospitality of the Silver Spur Saloon since early morning. "Well, hello there, pretty lady," slurred the tallest of the 3, a lanky man with a patchy beard and bloodshot eyes. "Where you headed in such a hurry?" Deanna tried to step around them. "Excuse me, gentlemen, I need to get home." The second cowboy, shorter but broader, moved to block her path. "Now don't be unfriendly, we're just looking for some pleasant company." "And I'm looking to pass," Deanna said firmly, though her heart was racing. "My nephew is ill and I need to get this medicine back to him. Hear that, boys?" "She's a nursemaid," laughed the third man, reaching out to touch her cheek. "I could use some nursing myself." Deanna jerked away but found herself backed against the wall of the doctor's office. "Please let me pass." "What's the rush?" The tall one leaned closer, his breath sour with whiskey. "Your nephew can wait a few minutes while you get to know us better." Deanna was calculating whether she could duck under his arm and make a run for it when a familiar voice cut through the tension. "The lady asked you to move." Jack Grayson stood a few feet away, his stance casual but his eyes hard as flint. Unlike their first meeting, he was clean-shaven, his clothes less travel-worn, but there was no mistaking the controlled power in his bearing. The tall cowboy turned, swaying slightly. "Mind your own business, friend." "I'm making it my business," Jack replied evenly. "Step aside and let the lady pass." The broad cowboy spat tobacco juice onto the boardwalk. "There's 3 of us and 1 of you, mister. Those ain't good odds." Jack smiled, but the expression didn't reach his eyes. "I like my odds just fine. Now you boys can walk away with your pride intact, or you can try your luck. Either way, the lady's leaving." For a tense moment, Deanna thought they would fight. Then the third cowboy, who'd been eyeing Jack more carefully than his companions, tugged at the tall one's sleeve. "Come on, Hank." "Ain't worth it. Plenty other entertainment in town." Hank glared at Jack for a long moment, then shrugged elaborately. "Your loss, lady. We was just being friendly." The 3 shuffled off, muttering and casting dark looks over their shoulders. Deanna released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "Are you all right?" Jack asked, moving closer but careful to maintain a respectful distance. Yes, thank you, Deanna said, clutching the medicine bottle tighter. I should have been more careful. You shouldn't have to be, Jack replied, his expression grim. Can I escort you to your wagon? Deanna hesitated. Samuel and Martha would be furious if they knew she'd spoken to Jack again, let alone accepted his escort, but the alternative was risking another encounter with the drunken cowboys. Yes, please, she decided, if it's not too much trouble. No trouble at all, Jack assured her, falling into step beside her. I'm heading that direction anyway, got myself hired at the Henderson place just like I was hoping. That's wonderful, Deanna said, genuinely pleased for him. The Henderson Ranch was one of the largest in the territory, known for treating its hands well. When do you start? Already have. Been there 2 weeks now. Mr. Henderson's a fair boss, works alongside his men. Jack glanced at her. I've got Sundays off and every other Saturday afternoon. That's why I'm in town today, Deanna nodded, unsure how to respond to what seemed like an invitation of sorts. I'm glad it's working out for you. They reached her wagon and Jack helped her up onto the seat. Your nephew, is he very ill? Diana showed him the medicine bottle. Just a childhood fever, the doctor says, but Martha, my sister-in-law, was worried. Jack nodded. Fevers can turn serious quick, you'd best get back. Yes, Deanna agreed, gathering the reins. Thank you again for your help. Jack tipped his hat. My pleasure, Miss Deanna. He hesitated, then added, I know it's not my place to ask, but if you find yourself in town again, I'd consider it an honor if you'd allow me to buy you a cup of coffee. At the hotel restaurant, he added hastily, all proper and above board. Deanna felt a warmth spread through her that had nothing to do with the weak November sun. That's very kind, but I'm not sure when I'll be in town next. The offer stands, Jack said simply, whenever that might be. Deanna drove home with her thoughts in a whirl. Jack Grayson's invitation had awakened something she'd thought long buried, a spark of hope, a reminder that she was still a woman, not just a widow or a burden. It was foolish, of course. She barely knew the man. But for the first time since Thomas's death, she found herself looking forward rather than back. Martha took the medicine with a terse nod of thanks, immediately disappearing into Joseph's room. Samuel was out in the fields, so Deanna was spared an immediate interrogation about her trip. She set about preparing dinner, humming softly to herself as she worked. Later that evening, after the children were in bed and Samuel was smoking his pipe by the fire, Martha fixed Deanna with a searching look. Mrs. Emmett says she saw you talking with a cowboy on the boardwalk today. Deanna froze, a darning needle halfway through one of Samuel's socks. She should have known the doctor's wife would notice and report back. Mrs. Emmett was Copper Creek's most dedicated purveyor of gossip. There were some cowboys who were being insistent, Deanna explained carefully. Mr. Grayson happened by and helped extricate me from an uncomfortable situation. Samuel lowered his newspaper. Grayson, the same man who interfered with your shopping, Deanna nodded, keeping her eyes on her darning. He works for the Henderson Ranch now. Convenient that he keeps turning up when you're in town, Samuel remarked, his tone sour. I hardly think twice in a month constitutes keeps turning up, Deanna retorted, then immediately regretted her sharp tone when she saw Samuel's expression darken. You've developed quite a mouth since coming here, he said coldly. Perhaps Martha and I have been too lenient. You seem to have forgotten your position. My position, Deanna echoed, setting down her darning. As a dependent in this household, Samuel clarified. We took you in when you had nowhere else to go. The least you could do is show some gratitude and respect. Deanna felt as though she'd been slapped. I am grateful, she said quietly, and I do respect you both, but I'm not a child, Samuel. Then stop acting like one, Martha interjected. Gadding about town, speaking with strange men, it's unseemly for a widow not yet a year past her husband's death. I wasn't gadding about, Deanna protested. I went directly to the doctor's office as instructed. The encounter was entirely unexpected and unwelcome, at least until Mr. Grayson intervened. Samuel exchanged a look with Martha. I think it's best if you don't go to town alone anymore, he said finally. It's clearly not safe for a woman of your limited experience. Deanna wanted to argue, to point out that she'd managed perfectly well in town during her 7 years of marriage, but the set of Samuel's jaw told her it would be useless. Instead, she simply nodded and returned to her darning, blinking back tears of frustration. That night, she pulled Thomas's old trunk from beneath her cot and carefully lifted the false bottom she'd created. Nestled inside was her most treasured possession, a journal bound in faded blue leather, a gift from her father on her 16th birthday. In it, she'd recorded her thoughts, dreams, and observations for the past 10 years. By the light of a single candle, Deanna opened to a fresh page and began to write. She described her encounter with the Cowboys, Jack's timely intervention, and the coffee invitation that still made her pulse quicken when she thought of it. Most of all, she poured out her frustration at being treated like an incompetent child by her own family. "They act as though I'm simple-minded," she wrote, "incapable of the most basic judgment. Samuel speaks of my position as though I were an indentured servant rather than his sister. I am grateful for their shelter, truly I am, but at what cost to my dignity, to my sense of self? Sometimes I feel I'm disappearing, becoming exactly what they believe me to be: useless, burdensome, without value." Deanna closed the journal, replaced it in its hiding place, and extinguished the candle. In the darkness, she allowed herself to remember Jack Grayson's steady gaze and the way he'd said, "You'd best get back," with genuine concern. For a brief moment, she'd felt seen not as Thomas's widow or Samuel's dependent sister, but as herself. It was a dangerous feeling to cultivate, she knew. Dangerous and likely futile. But as she drifted towards sleep, Deanna found herself wondering what it might be like to sit across from Jack in the hotel restaurant, sharing coffee and conversation like equals. The thought followed her into her dreams, a small beacon of warmth against the encroaching winter. December arrived with bitter winds and heavy snowfall. The world beyond the farmhouse windows turned white and silent, the days shortening until it seemed the sun barely rose before setting again. Deanna's life narrowed to an endless cycle of chores: cooking, cleaning, mending, tending to the children when Martha was busy with other tasks. Samuel had made good on his decree. Deanna hadn't been to town since that day in November. Martha did all the necessary shopping, returning with grudging reports that prices at Wilson's were indeed better than Whittaker's, though she never acknowledged Deanna's role in the discovery. Christmas approached with little fanfare. The Kincaid household observed the holiday with practical gifts and a special meal, but none of the festive atmosphere Deanna remembered from her childhood, when their father had been alive and their mother had filled the house with greenery and the scent of spiced cider. On Christmas Eve, as Deanna helped the children hang their stockings, 10-year-old Emma turned to her with curious eyes. "Aunt Deanna, why don't you ever smile anymore?" The innocent question caught Deanna off guard. "I smile," she protested, forcing her lips upward to demonstrate. Emma shook her head solemnly. "Not a real smile, not like when you tell us stories and forget that mother says stories are a waste of time." Deanna glanced toward the kitchen, where Martha was busy with Christmas preparations. "I have much to be thankful for," she said carefully. "A roof over my head, family around me, but you're not happy," Emma persisted with a child's directness. "Father says you weren't raised right, that's why you can't do things properly, but I think you do things differently, not wrong." Tears pricked at Deanna's eyes. "That's very kind of you to say, Emma. Will you tell us a Christmas story tonight, after Mother and Father are asleep?" Emma whispered. "Like you used to when we were little." Deanna hesitated. If Martha found out, there would be consequences. But looking into Emma's hopeful face, she couldn't bring herself to refuse. "Very well, but you must promise to go straight to sleep afterward." Emma nodded solemnly, her face alight with anticipation. "I promise." That night, after the house had gone quiet, Deanna crept into the children's room with a candle. All four were awake, huddled together in expectation. Deanna settled at the foot of Emma's bed and began to tell the story of the first Christmas, embellishing it with details of the star-filled night, the humble stable, and the wonder of the shepherds. As she spoke, she felt something loosening in her chest, a tightness she hadn't even realized was there. For these moments, she wasn't useless or burdensome. She was giving these children something valuable: imagination, wonder, a glimpse of a world beyond their practical, hard-working existence. "Aunt Deanna," 7-year-old William whispered when she'd finished, "will you marry again someday?" Deanna blinked, startled by the question. "I don't know, William. That's not something I think about." "I hope you do," Emma said firmly. "Someone nice who makes you smile for real." "That's enough now," Deanna said, rising from the bed. "Remember your promise straight to sleep." As she slipped back to her own room, Deanna found herself thinking of Jack Grayson. Would she ever see him again? And if she did, what then? She was firmly under Samuel and Martha's control, with no money of her own and no prospects beyond continued servitude in their household. January brought the harshest weather in years. Snow piled in drifts higher than the farmhouse windows, and temperatures dropped so low that the creek froze solid enough to walk across. Deanna hadn't set foot beyond the yard in weeks, the isolation wearing on her nerves like a physical ache. Then, on a bitterly cold morning in late January, everything changed. Samuel came in from the barn, his face grave. "Martha, Deanna, we have a problem. The root cellar's nearly flooded from the snow melt. We need to move everything before it spoils." For hours, they worked to salvage what they could, carrying preserves and root vegetables up the slippery steps to temporary storage in the coldest corner of the kitchen. Deanna was making her final trip, arms laden with jars of pickled beets, when her foot slipped on the icy steps. She fell hard, tumbling backward into the half-flooded cellar with a cry of alarm. The jars shattered around her, and pain exploded in her right ankle as it twisted beneath her. Samuel found her moments later, sitting in the murky water amid broken glass and spilled preserves, clutching her ankle and fighting back tears. "For God's sake, Deanna," he exclaimed, "can't you even manage a simple task without disaster?" Martha appeared at the top of the steps, taking in the scene with a sharp intake of breath. "The preserves, Deanna, those were meant to last us until spring." Deanna bit her lip against the pain and humiliation. "I'm sorry." "The step was icy, always an excuse," Samuel muttered, wading into the mess to help her up. "Always some reason why you can't manage what any ordinary woman could do without thinking." Deanna tried to stand, but her ankle gave way immediately, sending fresh waves of pain up her leg. She couldn't suppress a gasp. "She's hurt," Emma said from behind Martha, her young face concerned. "Father, she can't walk." Samuel's expression softened slightly as he examined Deanna's rapidly swelling ankle. "Looks like a bad sprain, maybe worse. Martha, we'll need to get her to Dr. Emmett." "In this weather," Martha protested, "the roads are barely passable." "We can't risk it turning gangrene," Samuel said grimly. "I'll take her in the sleigh. We can be there and back before dark if we leave now." Despite her pain, Deanna felt a surge of something like excitement. Town meant people, conversation, a brief respite from the suffocating atmosphere of the farmhouse. And though she tried to suppress the thought, town also meant the possibility of seeing Jack Grayson. Martha helped Deanna change into dry clothes while Samuel prepared the sleigh. "Try not to be a burden on the doctor," she instructed as she wrapped Deanna's ankle in a makeshift bandage. "He's surely busy with real emergencies in this weather." Deanna bit back a retort. A potentially broken ankle wasn't a real emergency, but arguing would only make matters worse. "I'll try to be quick," she promised instead. The journey to town was slow and uncomfortable, the sleigh jolting over frozen ruts in the road despite Samuel's careful driving. Deanna gritted her teeth against the pain, focusing on the pristine white landscape to distract herself. "I know you didn't fall on purpose," Samuel said abruptly when they were halfway to town. "But this is exactly the sort of thing I mean, Deanna. You're not careful, you don't think ahead." Deanna stared at her brother's profile, suddenly tired of accepting his assessment of her. "The step was icy, Samuel. Anyone could have fallen." "Martha didn't fall. I didn't fall. The children didn't fall." "Perhaps I was unlucky," Deanna suggested, "or perhaps I was simply the last one down the steps after they'd become more treacherous from use." Samuel glanced at her, surprised by her logical rebuttal. "Well, perhaps. Still, you should have been more careful." Yes, Samuel, Deanna said, falling back on the response that always seemed to satisfy him. By the time they reached Copper Creek, Deanna was chilled to the bone despite the heavy blankets Samuel had piled around her. The town looked different in winter smoke curling from chimneys, icicles hanging from eaves, the usually muddy Main Street transformed into a hard, packed ribbon of snow. Samuel pulled up in front of Dr. Emmett's office. "I need to see to some business while we're here," he announced. "Will you be all right on your own for an hour or so?" Deanna nodded, secretly relieved. An hour without Samuel's disapproving presence sounded like a gift, Doctor. Emmett confirmed what Deanna had already suspected: a severe sprain, not a break. "You'll need to stay off it for at least 2 weeks," he advised, wrapping the ankle firmly in bandages. "Keep it elevated when possible and use these crutches to get around." 2 weeks, Deanna echoed, dismayed. How would she earn her keep if she couldn't work? At minimum, Dr. Emmett emphasized. Pushing it too soon will only prolong the healing time. When the doctor had finished, Deanna found herself alone in his waiting room, Samuel still attending to his mysterious business. She was contemplating the challenging task of maneuvering down the office steps with her new crutches when the door opened, bringing a gust of cold air, and the last person she expected to see. Jack Grayson stood in the doorway, snow dusting his shoulders and hat. For a moment he didn't notice her, stamping his boots and removing his gloves. Then his gaze fell on Deanna, and his face transformed with a smile that seemed to warm the entire room. "Miss Deanna," he said, removing his hat, "what a pleasant surprise." Deanna was suddenly, acutely aware of her disheveled appearance, hair escaping its pins, dress still damp in places from the cellar flood, face flushed with pain. Yet Jack was looking at her as though she were the most welcome sight in the world. "Mr. Grayson," she managed. "What brings you to the doctor's office?" Jack held up his left hand, showing a crude bandage wrapped around his palm. "Minor disagreement with some barbed wire. Nothing serious, but Mr. Henderson insists we get proper treatment for any injury." His gaze dropped to her bandaged ankle and the crutches propped beside her chair. "You're hurt." Deanna explained briefly about the cellar accident, trying to make light of it. "The doctor says I'll need to stay off it for 2 weeks. I'm not sure how practical that will be." Jack frowned. "You need proper rest to heal. Surely your family understands that." Deanna gave a small, humorless laugh. "My family understands that every mouth needs to earn its keep. Resting isn't a luxury we can afford." Jack's expression darkened, but before he could respond, the outer door opened again and Samuel entered, bringing another blast of cold air. "Deanna, we need to," he broke off, noticing Jack. His eyes narrowed. "Grayson." "Mr. Kincaid," Jack responded with a polite nod. "I was just about to help your sister with those crutches. They can be tricky at first." Samuel moved quickly to Deanna's side as though to shield her. "That won't be necessary. I can assist my sister." Deanna saw the muscle in Jack's jaw tighten, but his voice remained even. "As you wish, sir." "Miss Deanna, I hope your ankle heals quickly." "Thank you, Mr. Grayson," Deanna said formally, conscious of Samuel's watchful gaze. Jack hesitated, then reached into his coat pocket and withdrew a small package wrapped in brown paper. "I nearly forgot I saw this in the general store and thought of you. A small Christmas gift, though I'm a month late in delivering it." Samuel made a sound of protest, but Deanna reached out and accepted the package before he could intervene. "That's very kind, thank you." "My pleasure," Jack said simply, tipping his hat to them both before disappearing into the doctor's inner office. In the sleigh on the way home, Samuel was unusually quiet, his face set in grim lines. Deanna held Jack's gift in her lap, unopened, afraid that Samuel might demand she return it if she revealed its contents. "I don't want you seeing that man again," Samuel said finally, his voice cutting through the silence like a knife. Deanna stared at the snow-covered landscape. "I hardly see him, Samuel. We've encountered each other exactly 3 times by chance." "3 times is a pattern, not chance," Samuel retorted. "He's looking for you, seeking you out." "That's absurd," Deanna protested. "Why would he do that?" Samuel gave her a pitying look. "You truly don't understand men, do you? A young widow, alone and vulnerable, you're an easy target for someone like him." "Someone like him." Deanna repeated. What exactly do you mean by that, a drifter? A hired gun? Samuel's hands tightened on the reins. Men like that don't settle down, Deanna. They take what they want and move on. You know nothing about him, Deanna said, surprising herself with her vehemence. He works for the Henderson ranch. Mr. Henderson wouldn't hire someone of poor character, Samuel snorted. Henderson hires whoever can sit a horse and handle cattle. Character doesn't enter into it. They rode the rest of the way in tense silence. By the time they reached the farmhouse, Deanna's ankle was throbbing painfully and her temper was frayed to the breaking point. Martha helped her inside and settled her on the sofa with her ankle elevated, but her sympathy evaporated when Samuel described the encounter with Jack. Bringing you gifts now, Martha exclaimed. Deanna, this is most improper. It's a book, Deanna said quietly, having finally unwrapped the package while Martha was fetching pillows. A collection of poetry, hardly scandalous. Martha and Samuel exchanged meaningful looks. Poetry, Samuel said, as though the word tasted bad. Exactly the sort of useless nonsense that's always distracted you from practical matters. Deanna clutched the small volume tighter. It was a beautiful edition of Tennyson's works, clearly selected with care. The inscription inside reads simply, "To Deanna may these words bring you comfort and joy. Your friend, Jack Grayson." I'd like to rest now, Deanna said, suddenly exhausted by more than physical pain. The doctor said I should keep the ankle elevated. After Martha and Samuel left her alone, Deanna opened the book to a random page and found herself reading Ulysses. The familiar lines took on new meaning as she read them in the quiet of the afternoon. I cannot rest from travel. I will drink life to the lees. All times I have enjoyed greatly, have suffered greatly, both with those that loved me and alone. Tears pricked at her eyes. Was this how Jack saw her? As someone capable of drinking life to the lees, of suffering greatly but enjoying greatly too? No one had ever ascribed such courage or passion to her before. The next 2 weeks were a study in frustration. True to Dr. Emmett's prediction, Deanna's ankle improved slowly, requiring her to use the crutches for any movement around the house. Martha made little effort to hide her irritation at Deanna's reduced capacity for work, assigning her tedious, stationary tasks like shelling peas or darning endless socks. The children, however, seemed to delight in Deanna's enforced immobility. It meant she was always available for questions, stories, or simply companionship. Even Joseph, at 4 the youngest and usually shy, took to bringing her his wooden animals and inventing elaborate stories about them. You encourage them too much, Martha complained when she found Deanna listening intently to Emma's account of an imaginary journey to the moon. They should be doing their chores, not wasting time with make-believe. Deanna bit her tongue against the retort that rose immediately that childhood was fleeting, that imagination was not waste but nourishment for the soul. Instead, she simply nodded and suggested Emma might check if her mother needed help with dinner. In the evenings, when the house was quiet, Deanna read Jack's Gift by candlelight, finding in Tennyson's verses echoes of her own longing for something more than the narrow existence she'd been allotted. She wrote in her journal more frequently now, filling pages with thoughts and questions she dared not voice aloud. By mid-February, Deanna's ankle had healed enough that she could walk without crutches, though she still favored it slightly. The first time she managed the stairs to the children's bedroom without assistance, Emma declared it a miracle and insisted on a celebratory story. Not too long, Deanna cautioned, mindful of Martha's prohibition against filling the children's heads with nonsense. But the story of a brave princess who rescued herself from a tower prison stretched longer than intended, the children's rapt faces encouraging Deanna to elaborate each twist and turn. She was just describing the princess's triumphant return home when the bedroom door opened abruptly, revealing Martha's stern countenance. I thought I heard voices, Martha said coldly. Children to bed immediately. Deanna, I'd like to speak with you downstairs. The children scrambled under their covers, shooting apologetic glances at Deanna as she followed Martha from the room, her heart sinking. In the kitchen, Samuel waited with an expression that suggested he'd been thoroughly briefed on Deanna's transgression. "Sit down," he ordered, pointing to a chair at the table. Deanna obeyed, folding her hands in her lap to hide their trembling. She felt absurdly like a child caught stealing cookies, though she was 26 years old and a widow besides. "Martha tells me you've been undermining our authority with the children," Samuel began without preamble, "filling their heads with stories when they should be sleeping or working." "They enjoy the stories," Deanna said quietly, "and they complete all their chores." "Surely a few minutes of imagination isn't harmful?" "It is when it contradicts everything we're trying to teach them," Martha interjected. "Hard work, practical skills, respect for authority, these are what they need to succeed in life. Not fairy tales about princesses who don't know their proper place." Deanna flinched at the implied criticism. "The princess in the story was resourceful and brave. Those seem like valuable qualities to me." "Don't be obtuse," Samuel snapped. "You know very well what Martha means. You're encouraging the children, especially Emma, to question the natural order of things. Women have their sphere, men have theirs. That's God's design." Deanna thought of the poem she'd read just last night, Tennyson's The Princess, with its radical notion that women deserved education and autonomy. Jack had underlined certain passages as though he'd known they would resonate with her. "I meant no harm," she said finally, unwilling to engage in a theological debate she couldn't win. "I'll be more mindful in the future." Samuel studied her for a long moment. "I don't think you understand the seriousness of this, Deanna. We've been patient with your limitations. We've given you time to learn the skills you should have mastered years ago, but your influence on the children has become problematic." A chill ran down Deanna's spine. "What are you saying?" "We've been discussing alternatives," Martha said, her voice oddly gentle despite her hard eyes. "My cousin in Denver has written that she knows of a position for a companion to an elderly lady. The pay is modest, but you'd have room and board." Deanna stared at them, unable to process what she was hearing. "You're sending me away. We're trying to help you find a situation better suited to your abilities," Samuel corrected. "The truth is, Deanna, you're not cut out for farm life. You never have been. This position would be less physically demanding, and the old lady apparently enjoys poetry and such nonsense." "When?" Deanna asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "As soon as the roads clear in spring," Martha replied. "April, most likely, April, less than 2 months away." Deanna nodded mechanically, unable to form a coherent response through the roaring in her ears. They were casting her out, just as she'd secretly feared they might. All her efforts to adapt, to learn, to make herself useful, none of it had been enough. "May I be excused?" she managed finally. I need to think." Samuel waved a dismissive hand. "Go, but understand this is for the best, Deanna, for everyone concerned." In her small room, Deanna sank onto her cot, too shocked even for tears. Denver was hundreds of miles away. She would never see Emma or the other children again. She would never see Jack Grayson again either, though that hardly mattered. He was little more than a kind stranger who'd shown her momentary courtesy. And yet, as she reached for her journal, it was Jack's face she pictured. Jack, who'd looked at her as though she mattered. Jack, who'd chosen a gift that spoke to her soul rather than her usefulness. Jack, who'd said she was priceless when everyone else found her wanting. That night, Deanna made a decision. If she was to be sent away regardless of her efforts, she would at least grant herself one small freedom before she went. She would see Jack Grayson again, properly this time, not a chance encounter but a deliberate meeting. She would accept that cup of coffee he'd offered, consequences be damned. The opportunity came sooner than she expected. 2 days later, Martha announced that she needed Deanna to go to town for supplies. "Samuel's busy with the new calf and I can't leave the preserving," she explained. "You'll need to be careful with that ankle, but doctor Emmett did say walking would strengthen it." Deanna nodded, keeping her expression neutral despite the surge of excitement. "I'll be careful. What do we need?" Martha handed her a list and a small pouch of coins. "Only the essentials: flour, sugar, coffee, and thread. Wilson's should have everything." Her expression softened slightly. "Take your time if you need to rest your ankle. No sense making it worse again." Deanna nearly laughed at the unexpected reprieve. Take her time. That was exactly what she intended to do. The journey to town was slow but not unpleasant. The February day was crisp but sunny, the snow beginning to melt in patches to reveal the first hints of early spring. Deanna let the horse set his own pace, using the time to rehearse what she might say if she encountered Jack. Copper Creek was quiet when she arrived, the mid-week lull meaning fewer wagons and riders on the main street. Deanna completed her shopping at Wilson's efficiently, securing everything on Martha's list with enough coin left over for a small indulgence, a paper of peppermint drops for the children. With her purchases loaded in the wagon, Deanna found herself hesitating. She'd come to town hoping to see Jack, but had no idea where to look for him. The Henderson ranch was miles outside town. What were the chances he'd be in Copper Creek on this particular Wednesday? Slim to none, she acknowledged ruefully, yet she couldn't bring herself to leave just yet. Martha had given her permission to rest her ankle. After all, perhaps a cup of tea at the hotel restaurant wouldn't be amiss. The Copper Creek Hotel was the town's pride, a two-story structure with actual glass windows and a dining room that served proper meals instead of just the stew and biscuits offered at the saloons. Deanna had eaten there exactly once, when Thomas took her for their first anniversary. She entered hesitantly, conscious of her plain dress and worn shawl among the relatively fine furnishings. The dining room was nearly empty at this hour, with only 2 tables occupied, one by a traveling salesman arranging his sample case, the other by a familiar figure in a work-worn duster. Jack Grayson looked up as she entered, his expression shifting from surprise to pleasure so rapidly that Deanna felt her cheeks warm. He rose immediately, gesturing to the empty chair across from him. "Miss Deanna," he said, his voice carrying across the quiet room, "what a fortunate coincidence." "Would you do me the honor of joining me?" Deanna hesitated, propriety warring with desire. A respectable widow didn't sit alone with a man not related to her, especially in a public place where gossip might spread. But in 2 months she would be gone from Copper Creek forever. "What did propriety matter now? Thank you, Mr. Grayson," she said, crossing to his table. "If you're certain I'm not interrupting." "You could never interrupt," Jack assured her, holding her chair with a courtly gesture that reminded Deanna of her father. "I was just enjoying a cup of coffee and some apple pie that Mrs. Hendricks swears is the best in the territory." Deanna settled herself, removing her gloves but keeping her shawl draped around her shoulders. "I should thank you properly for the book," she said when Jack had resumed his seat. It was a thoughtful gift. Jack's smile reached his eyes, crinkling the corners in a way that made him look younger. "Did you enjoy it? I remember you mentioned liking poetry when we spoke at Wilson's that first time." Deanna was touched that he'd remembered such a small detail from their brief conversation. "I've read it every night. Tennyson has been a favorite since I was a girl, but I'd never owned a proper collection of his work." The waitress approached, and Jack ordered coffee for Deanna and another slice of pie. "Unless you'd prefer something else," he added, looking to Deanna for confirmation. "Coffee and pie sounds perfect," she assured him, touched by his consideration. When the waitress had gone, Jack leaned forward slightly. "How is your ankle? You're walking better, I see." "Much improved, thank you." Deanna hesitated, then decided on honesty. "Though my enforced rest has caused some difficulties at home." Jack's expression grew serious. "Your brother and his wife didn't allow you to heal properly?" "It's not that exactly," Deanna said, searching for words that wouldn't sound like complaints. "They were patient in their way, but I wasn't able to contribute as much to the household, and that created tension." Jack studied her for a moment. "May I speak plainly, Miss Deanna?" Deanna nodded, curious about what this plainness might entail. "Your brother treats you poorly," Jack said simply. "I've seen it each time you've been together. He speaks to you as though you're a burden rather than family." Deanna looked down at her hands, startled by his directness. "Samuel and Martha took me in when I had nowhere else to go. I owe them my gratitude." "Gratitude, yes. Servitude, no." Jack's voice was gentle despite the firmness of his words. "There's a difference between earning your keep and being treated as though your worth depends solely on your usefulness." The waitress returned with Deanna's coffee and pie, providing a welcome interruption. Deanna took a sip of the hot, strong brew, using the moment to compose herself. "They're sending me to Denver," she said finally, setting down her cup. In April, Martha's cousin knows of a position as companion to an elderly lady. Jack's expression darkened. "And is this what you want?" No one had asked her that before, not Samuel, not Martha, not even Deanna herself. She'd accepted the decision, as she'd accepted so many others in her life, as an inevitability beyond her control. "I don't know what I want," she admitted. "I only know I can't stay where I'm not wanted. And where are you wanted, Deanna?" Jack asked softly, dropping the formal miss for the first time. Deanna looked up, meeting his steady gaze. "I don't know that either." Jack reached across the table, his hand stopping just short of touching hers. "You're wanted right here," he said simply. "By me," Deanna's breath caught. "You barely know me." "I know enough," Jack countered. "I know you're kind even to those who don't deserve it. I know you're intelligent and appreciate beauty. I know you've endured loss and hardship without letting it embitter you." He smiled slightly. "And I know I've thought about you every day since we met." Deanna felt as though the floor had dropped away beneath her feet. This couldn't be happening, not to her, not now, when she was about to be sent away like an unwanted parcel. "I don't know what to say," she whispered. "You don't have to say anything right now," Jack assured her. "I understand this is unexpected. I just couldn't let you go to Denver without telling you how I feel." Deanna forced herself to think practically. "Even if I wanted to stay, and I'm not saying I do, I have no means to support myself. No skills that anyone values." Jack's expression hardened. "Who told you that? Your brother?" Deanna nodded, embarrassed. "He's not wrong. I can't even milk a cow properly." "Milking cows is a learned skill, not an inborn talent," Jack said firmly, "and you have plenty of valuable skills. You're literate, articulate, compassionate, none of which puts food on the table," Deanna interrupted. "You'd be surprised." Jack sat back, studying her thoughtfully. "Mrs. Henderson was telling me just last week that she wishes she could find someone to teach basic letters and numbers to the ranch children. The nearest proper school is in town, too far for daily travel, especially in winter." Deanna blinked, surprised. "A teaching position?" "Informal, but yes. Room, board, and wages included." Jack held up a hand as Deanna began to protest. "And before you say you're not qualified, remember that most of these children have never had any formal education. They need someone patient and kind who can teach them their letters and basic arithmetic. I've seen you with your nieces and nephews. You have a gift for explaining things clearly." Diana's mind raced with possibilities. Teaching children to read and write, it was something she could do, something she'd enjoy. And the Henderson Ranch was only a few miles from Copper Creek, not hundreds of miles away in Denver. "I don't know," she said finally. "It sounds wonderful, but Samuel has already arranged the Denver position. And I'm not sure Mrs. Henderson would want to hire someone with my reputation." Jack frowned. "What reputation?" Deanna gestured vaguely. "The useless widow, the burden. Surely people talk." "People always talk," Jack agreed, "but the Hendersons aren't interested in gossip. They judge people by their actions and character." He hesitated, then added, "And as for what people might say about you and me, well, that's easily addressed." Deanna felt her cheeks warm again. "Addressed how?" Jack met her gaze steadily. "I'm building a cabin on land I've leased from Henderson. Nothing fancy, but it'll be solid and warm. By summer, it'll be finished." He took a deep breath. "What I'm trying to say in my clumsy way is that I'm not proposing anything improper. I'm proposing marriage." Deanna stared at him, certain she'd misheard. "Marriage, Jack? We barely know each other." "I know," he acknowledged. "And I'm not asking for an answer today. I'm asking you to consider the possibility, to give us time to know each other better before you decide to leave for Denver." Deanna's thoughts whirled. Marriage to Jack Grayson, a man who looked at her as though she were precious, who valued her mind and heart rather than just her usefulness around a house. It seemed impossible, like something from one of the stories she told the children. "I need to think," she said finally. "This is all so unexpected." Jack nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Of course, take all the time you need, but know this, Deanna, when I said you were priceless to me, I meant it. Not for what you can do, but for who you are. Deanna finished her coffee in a daze, the conversation turning to lighter topics: the weather, the early signs of spring, Jack's progress on his cabin. By the time she realized how late it was growing, the shadows had lengthened considerably outside the hotel windows. "I should go," she said reluctantly. "Martha will be wondering what's become of me." Jack insisted on walking her to her wagon and helping her up onto the seat. As he handed her the reins, his fingers brushed hers, sending a jolt of awareness through her that had nothing to do with the cold February air. "Will you come to town again soon?" he asked, his eyes hopeful. Deanna thought of Samuel and Martha, of their plans to send her away, of the disapproval that would meet any mention of Jack Grayson. "I don't know," she answered honestly, "but I'll try." Jack nodded, stepping back from the wagon. "I'll be here every Wednesday afternoon," he said simply. "Just in case." The ride home was a blur, Deanna's mind too full of Jack's words and the impossible future he'd offered to notice the familiar landscape. By the time she reached the farmhouse, she'd made no decisions beyond one. She would keep this afternoon to herself, a precious secret to sustain her through whatever came next. Martha asked no questions about her delay in town, merely checking the purchases against her list with a satisfied nod. "Your ankle seems to have held up well," she observed. "Perhaps you're finally healing properly." "Yes," Deanna agreed absently. "The doctor was right about walking strengthening it." That night, in the privacy of her small room, Deanna wrote in her journal until her candle guttered low. She poured out her confusion, her fear, her tentative hope. Jack Grayson wanted to marry her. Jack thought she could teach children, that she had value beyond cooking and cleaning. Jack believed she was priceless. "But what do I believe?" she wrote finally. "Do I have the courage to choose a different path? Or will I let others decide my fate, as I always have?" The question haunted her through a restless night and into the gray dawn of the next day. For the next week, Deanna moved through her duties like a sleepwalker, her thoughts constantly returning to Jack and his unexpected proposal. The children noticed her distraction, though thankfully Martha and Samuel seemed too busy with early spring preparations to pay much attention to her. "Are you sad about going to Denver, Aunt Deanna?" Emma asked one evening as Deanna tucked her in. Deanna smoothed the blanket over the child's shoulders. "I'm not sure sad is the right word, Emma. Uncertain, perhaps." Emma frowned. "Father says it's a good opportunity for you. That you'll be more suited to city life." Deanna managed a small smile. "Your father may be right, but it's always difficult to leave what's familiar for something unknown." "I don't want you to go," Emma confessed, her young face solemn. "Who will tell us stories? Who will explain things properly?" Deanna felt a pang of guilt. She'd been so focused on her own dilemma that she hadn't considered how her departure might affect the children. "You'll be fine," she assured Emma. "You're growing up so fast, you'll be telling stories to Joseph before you know it." But as she left the children's room, Deanna found herself wondering if she could really leave them. For all their parents' strictness, the children were bright, curious souls who deserved more than the narrow education Samuel and Martha deemed sufficient. What would become of Emma's keen mind, William's artistic talent, Mary's gift for music, little Joseph's sensitive nature? The following Wednesday dawned clear and mild, a true hint of spring in the air. Deanna woke with a sense of purpose she hadn't felt in months. Today she would go to town again. Today she would see Jack. Today she would begin to take control of her own life. But when she entered the kitchen, she found Martha already dressed for town, her list of needed supplies in hand. "Good morning, Deanna," Martha said briskly. "Samuel needs you to help with the new piglets today." "I'll handle the shopping." Deanna's heart sank. "I thought, that is, my ankle is fully healed now. I'd be happy to save you the trip." Martha gave her an odd look. "That's considerate but unnecessary. Samuel specifically asked for your help with the piglets. You know how he values your gentle touch with the animals." This transparent falsehood Samuel had never valued anything about Deanna's approach to farm work, told her that her brother and sister-in-law suspected something. Perhaps Mrs. Emmett had seen her with Jack at the hotel and reported back. Perhaps someone else had mentioned her extended absence in town last week. Of course, Deanna said, forcing a smile. "I'm happy to help with the piglets." Throughout the day, as she helped Samuel clean the pen and tend to the sow and her squealing offspring, Deanna tried to formulate a plan. She could slip away after dark, perhaps, and make her way to town on foot. But no, it was nearly 10 miles, far too far to walk in the dark on roads still muddy from melting snow. She could write to Jack, explaining her situation. But how would she get the letter to him? Samuel collected the mail on his infrequent trips to town, and any letter addressed to Jack Grayson would immediately raise suspicions. By evening, Deanna was resigned to missing their Wednesday meeting. Jack would wait at the hotel, perhaps for hours, while she sat helplessly miles away, unable to explain her absence. Would he think she'd rejected his offer? That she'd been too cowardly to face him again? The thought was unbearable. When Martha returned from town, her manner was smug, her eyes watchful as Deanna helped unpack the supplies. "The weather's turning," she announced. "Mr. Wilson says we might get one last heavy snow before spring truly arrives." Deanna nodded, only half listening as she methodically stored flour and sugar in their proper containers. "I saw your friend in town," Martha added casually. "That Cowboy Grayson, isn't it? He seemed to be waiting for someone at the hotel." Deanna kept her expression neutral with effort. "Did he?" "I wouldn't know his habits." Martha's eyes narrowed. "No, strange, since Mrs. Emmett mentioned seeing you having quite a cozy chat with him there last week." So her suspicions were confirmed. Deanna straightened, meeting Martha's gaze directly. "We had coffee and pie," she said evenly. "Hardly scandalous. Hardly appropriate for a widow not yet a year past her husband's bereavement," Martha countered. "What would Thomas think, seeing you gallivanting about town with some drifter?" The mention of Thomas finally ignited Deanna's simmering frustration. "Thomas would want me to be happy," she said, her voice stronger than she'd intended. "He never expected me to spend the rest of my life alone." Martha stepped back, clearly startled by Deanna's uncharacteristic defiance. "Well, I see this Grayson fellow has already turned your head. All the more reason to get you to Denver as soon as possible." "And if I don't want to go to Denver?" Deanna challenged, surprising herself as much as Martha. Martha's lips thinned to a hard line. "You don't have a choice, Deanna. The arrangements are made, the position is secured. You'll go where you're sent, like any respectable woman would." "I'm not a parcel to be sent anywhere," Deanna retorted. "I'm a grown woman perfectly capable of making my own decisions." "Are you?" Martha asked coldly, "because your decisions thus far have hardly demonstrated good judgment. Marrying a minor with no prospects, failing to learn basic household skills, and now entertaining the attentions of a saddle tramp who'll move on as soon as he gets what he wants from you." Deanna felt her cheeks flame with anger and embarrassment. "You know nothing about Jack Grayson." "And you do," Martha laughed harshly. "After what 3 chance meetings? Deanna, your naivety would be charming if it weren't so dangerous. Men like Grayson prey on women like you, lonely, desperate, easy to impress with a few pretty words." Deanna opened her mouth to defend Jack, then closed it again. Nothing she said would change Martha's mind, and arguing would only make matters worse. "I'm tired," she said instead. "May I be excused?" Martha waved a dismissive hand. "Go. But understand this, Deanna, there will be no more trips to town for you. Not until it's time to leave for Denver." In her room, Deanna paced the narrow space between her cot and the door, anger and frustration making it impossible to sit still. She was effectively a prisoner now, denied even the small freedom of a trip to town. How could she let Jack know what had happened? How could she answer his proposal when she couldn't even see him? As darkness fell, Deanna continued to pace, her thoughts racing. She could run away, perhaps. But with what? She had no money beyond the few coins she'd saved from selling small embroidery pieces to Mrs. Wilson. Not enough for a stagecoach ticket, certainly not enough to establish herself anywhere. She could appeal to Samuel directly, explain about Jack's proposal and the teaching position at the Henderson ranch. But Samuel had already made his opinion of Jack abundantly clear. He would dismiss the proposal as fantasy, or worse, as evidence of Jack's dishonorable intentions. By midnight, Deanna had reached a decision. She would wait. April was still 6 weeks away. Surely in that time, an opportunity would present itself, a chance to get word to Jack, to explain her absence, to make plans for the future she now realized she desperately wanted. For the first time in months, perhaps years, Deanna fell asleep with a sense of purpose. Whatever happened, she would not meekly accept the fate others had chosen for her. She would find a way to create her own path, even if that path led through difficulties she couldn't yet imagine. The predicted snow arrived the next day, heavy and wet, transforming the landscape once more into a white wilderness. Deanna watched from the kitchen window as Samuel and the two farmhands struggled to ensure the animals were sheltered and fed. Despite her determination of the night before, she felt her spirits sink. In weather like this, communication with the outside world would be all but impossible. "Stop daydreaming and finish those dishes," Martha instructed sharply. "There's bread to be made and mending to be done before dinner." Deanna turned away from the window, resuming her task with mechanical efficiency. 6 weeks suddenly seemed an eternity. Days passed, each one indistinguishable from the last. Deanna performed her duties with quiet competence, keeping her thoughts and plans to herself. At night, she wrote in her journal, detailing her hopes and fears, sketching out possible futures with Jack. The writing was her lifeline, the only place she could be truly honest. Then, a week after her confrontation with Martha, an unexpected opportunity arose. "The Petersons' boy is sick," Samuel announced at breakfast. "Scarlet fever, most likely. Dr. Emmett's been called, but they need help with the other children." Martha frowned. "That's unfortunate, but surely Mrs. Peterson's sister can assist. She lives just down the road." Samuel shook his head. "She's with child herself, near her time, not safe for her to be exposed." He looked at Deanna. "You've had scarlet fever, haven't you, when you were 10 or so?" Deanna nodded, remembering the miserable weeks of illness. "Yes, just before Mother died." "Then you're not at risk," Samuel said with a nod. "You'll go to the Petersons today, pack enough for a week at least. These things take time to run their course." Deanna could hardly believe her good fortune. The Peterson farm was only 3 miles from town, a long walk, but not an impossible one. And if she was staying for a week or more, surely she could find an opportunity to get word to Jack. "Of course," she agreed, careful to keep her voice neutral. "I'm happy to help." Martha looked suspicious but said nothing as Deanna packed her few belongings. The children, however, were less restrained in their disappointment. "Why does Aunt Deanna have to go?" Emma demanded. "Why can't someone else help the Petersons?" "Because your aunt has had scarlet fever before and won't get sick again," Samuel explained patiently. "And because the Petersons are our neighbors and neighbors help each other." "But who will tell us stories?" Joseph asked, his lower lip trembling. Deanna knelt to the little boy's level. "I'll be back before you know it," she promised. "And when I return, I'll have new stories for you." Whether that was true remained to be seen, but Diana was determined to make it so. One way or another, she would find a path forward that included both the children she loved and the man who saw her true worth. The Peterson farm was chaotic when Diana arrived, Mrs. Peterson herself looking harried and exhausted as she tended to her sick 12-year-old son while trying to keep her 4 younger children from disturbing him. "Deanna, thank God," the older woman exclaimed when she saw her. "I'm at my wit's end. The little ones need attention, but Robert's fever is so high and he's having such terrible dreams." Deanna set down her bag and immediately took charge of the younger children, herding them into the kitchen for a simple lunch, and then organizing quiet activities to keep them occupied. By evening, she had established a routine that allowed Mrs. Peterson to focus on Robert, while Deanna handled everything else. "You're a godsend," Mrs. Peterson said gratefully as they sat together by the fire after the younger children were finally asleep. "I don't know how I would have managed without you." Deanna smiled, warmed by the rare praise. "I'm glad to help. How is Robert this evening?" "His fever's down a bit, thank the Lord. Dr. Emmett says the crisis should pass in a day or two, but he'll be weak for weeks afterward." Mrs. Peterson sighed, rubbing her tired eyes. "Which means I'll need help for longer than we initially thought. I hope that won't be a problem with your brother." "Not at all," Deanna assured her, though in truth she had no idea how Samuel would react to an extended absence. Family comes first, but neighbors are a close second. Mrs. Peterson nodded, clearly too exhausted for further conversation. Deanna encouraged her to get some sleep while she kept watch over Robert, promising to wake her if his condition changed. Alone in the quiet house, Deanna allowed herself to think about Jack. Was he still waiting each Wednesday at the hotel? Had he given up on her? The uncertainty was maddening. Then, as she checked Robert's fever for what felt like the 100th time, an idea occurred to her. Doctor Emmett would be returning tomorrow to check on the boy's progress. The doctor regularly visited the Henderson ranch to attend to injuries and illnesses among the hands. Could she entrust him with a message for Jack? It was a risk. Dr. Emmett was notoriously gossipy, and his wife even more so. If word got back to Samuel that Deanna was corresponding with Jack, the consequences would be severe. Yet what alternative did she have? By morning, Deanna had composed and rewritten her note a dozen times in her head. It needed to be simple, clear, and discreet enough that if it fell into the wrong hands, it wouldn't immediately reveal the depth of their connection. When Dr. Emmett arrived mid-morning, Deanna waited until he had examined Robert and pronounced him improving before approaching him with her request. "Dr. Emmett, I wonder if I might ask a favor," she began hesitantly. "There's a man working at the Henderson ranch, Jack Grayson. He left a book for me in town, and I wasn't able to thank him properly. Would you be kind enough to deliver a note when you make your rounds there?" The doctor's bushy eyebrows rose with interest. "Grayson, heard he's a capable hand, building a place of his own on Henderson land from what folks say." Deanna kept her expression neutral despite the leap of her heart at this confirmation of Jack's plans. "Is he? I wouldn't know. We've only spoken a few times in town." Dr. Emmett's expression suggested he didn't entirely believe her, but he nodded agreeably. "I'd be happy to deliver your note, Mrs. Kincaid. I'm headed to Henderson's tomorrow, as it happens." One of the hands took a fall from a horse, needs his shoulder checked. "Thank you," Deanna said with sincere gratitude. "I'll have it ready before you leave." Once the doctor had gone downstairs to speak with Mrs. Peterson, Deanna quickly found paper and pencil in the Petersons' small desk. Her hand trembled slightly as she wrote, "Mr. Grayson, circumstances prevent me from coming to town as I had hoped. I am currently assisting at the Peterson farm where one of the children is ill with scarlet fever. I expect to be here for at least 2 weeks, possibly longer. Your kind offer has been much on my mind. I would very much like to discuss it further when opportunity allows. With regards, Deanna Kincaid." It was formal, perhaps overly so, but Deanna couldn't risk being more explicit. She folded the note carefully and sealed it with a drop of candle wax, then wrote Jack's name on the outside. When Dr. Emmett departed, the note safely tucked in his bag, Deanna felt a weight lift from her shoulders. She had taken action, small though it was. She had reached out to Jack, let him know she hadn't simply abandoned their connection. What happened next was out of her hands, but at least she had tried. The days at the Peterson farm fell into a routine. Robert's fever broke completely on the 3rd day, though he remained weak and required frequent attention. The younger children grew accustomed to Deanna's presence, accepting her authority and even seeking her out for comfort and entertainment. Mrs. Peterson, relieved of some of her burden, began to regain her energy and good humor. A week passed with no word from Jack. Deanna tried not to be disappointed. Dr. Emmett might have forgotten to deliver the note, or Jack might be away from the ranch on business, or any number of other explanations might account for the silence. Then, on the 8th day of Deanna's stay, as she was hanging laundry in the weak March sunshine, she heard the sound of an approaching horse. Looking up, she saw a familiar figure riding toward the farmhouse. Jack Grayson, his hat pulled low against the sun, his posture as straight and confident as she remembered. Diana's heart leapt into her throat. She glanced toward the house, but Mrs. Peterson was inside with the children, unable to see the yard from her position in the kitchen. For a few precious moments, Deanna would be alone with Jack. He dismounted smoothly, tying his horse to the fence before approaching her with measured steps. Miss Deanna, he said, removing his hat, I got your note. Deanna's fingers twisted in the damp sheet she'd been about to hang. I'm glad. I wasn't sure if Dr. Emmett would remember to deliver it. He did, Jack confirmed, though he took his sweet time about it. Only gave it to me yesterday, said he'd forgotten it in his bag. That explained the delay, at least. Deanna relaxed slightly. I'm sorry I couldn't come to town as planned. My brother and sister-in-law found out about our meeting, Jack finished for her. I figured as much. Mrs. Emmett isn't known for her discretion. Deanna nodded, hanging the sheet on the line to give her hands something to do. They've forbidden me to go to town again. They're quite determined I should take the position in Denver. Jack moved closer, though still maintaining a respectful distance. And what are you determined to do, Deanna? The direct question caught her off guard. What was she determined to do? She'd spent so long letting others direct her life that the concept of determination felt foreign, almost frightening. I don't want to go to Denver, she said finally, meeting his gaze. I want to stay here, near the children, near you. Jack's expression softened. I'm glad to hear it, because I've been talking to the Hendersons about that teaching position. Mrs. Henderson is quite excited about the possibility, said she'd be willing to meet with you as soon as you're available. Deanna felt a flutter of hope and anxiety, but I have no formal qualifications. What if I'm not suitable? Mrs. Henderson was a teacher herself before she married, Jack explained. She says the most important qualification is patience and a genuine interest in children. The rest can be learned. Deanna thought of the hours she'd spent with the Peterson children this past week, teaching them simple games, helping the older ones with their letters, answering endless questions about the world. She'd found joy in those moments, a sense of purpose she hadn't felt in years. I think I could do it, she said, surprising herself with her confidence. I think I could be a good teacher. Jack's smile was like the sun breaking through clouds. I know you could. The question is, how do we make it happen? Your brother seems determined to send you to Denver. Deanna hung another sheet, using the moment to gather her thoughts. I've been thinking about that. If I could secure the position with Mrs. Henderson, first have something definite to show Samuel, he might be more willing to consider it. He respects the Hendersons. Everyone does. Jack nodded thoughtfully. That could work. Mrs. Henderson mentioned she'd be in town this Friday for the Ladies' Aid Society meeting, if you could meet her then. I can't go to town, Deanna reminded him. Samuel and Martha have forbidden it. But you're not at their farm now, Jack pointed out. You're here helping Mrs. Peterson, and town is only 3 miles away. Deanna bit her lip, considering it was true she had more freedom here than at Samuel's farm. And Mrs. Peterson, while respectable, was less rigid in her views than Martha. I could ask Mrs. Peterson if I might go to town for supplies, she said slowly. She's been very grateful for my help. I think she would agree. Then it's settled, Jack said with satisfaction. Friday at 2 o'clock at the hotel, Mrs. Henderson will be there after her meeting. He hesitated, then added, and I'll be there too, if that's acceptable to you. Deanna found herself smiling, a genuine smile that felt strange on her face after so many months of careful neutrality. More than acceptable, Mr. Grayson. Jack's expression turned serious. Deanna, about what I said before about marriage, I meant it. But I understand if you need more time, if you want to establish yourself as a teacher first. I don't want you to feel pressured. Deanna felt a rush of warmth at his consideration. How different from Samuel and Martha, who had planned her future without consulting her wishes at all. Thank you for understanding, she said softly. I do need some time. Not because I doubt your sincerity, but because I need to know I can stand on my own before I choose to stand with someone else. Jack nodded, his eyes warm with admiration. That's fair and wise. He glanced toward the house, where movement could be seen through the window. I should go before Mrs. Peterson spots me and starts wondering what business I have here. Deanna nodded, reluctant to see him leave but aware of the propriety of the situation. I'll see you Friday then. 2 o'clock at the hotel. Jack replaced his hat, his eyes never leaving hers. Friday, he confirmed. Then, with a swift, unexpected movement, he reached for her hand and raised it to his lips. Until then, Miss Deanna. The touch of his lips on her skin sent a shiver through Deanna that had nothing to do with the March breeze. She watched him mount his horse and ride away, her hand still tingling where he had kissed it. For the first time in longer than she could remember, Deanna felt truly hopeful about the future. Friday might change everything, or it might simply be the first step on a longer journey. Either way, she was finally moving forward on a path of her own choosing. The next 2 days passed in a blur of anticipation and preparation. Deanna convinced Mrs. Peterson that she needed to go to town for special supplies for Robert's recovery, a particular type of broth that Dr. Emmett had recommended, available only at Wilson's store. Of course you must go, Mrs. Peterson agreed readily. Robert's health is the priority, and you've been such a help already. Take the wagon and be back by supper if you can. Friday dawned clear and mild, a perfect early spring day. Deanna dressed with particular care in her best dress, a simple navy blue affair that nonetheless flattered her coloring and fit well despite having been made 3 years before. She arranged her hair in a neat coil at the nape of her neck, secured with her mother's tortoiseshell combs. Looking in the small mirror in the Petersons' guest room, Deanna barely recognized herself. The woman who gazed back at her seemed younger somehow, her eyes brighter, her expression more determined than she had seen in years. The drive to town was pleasant, the roads mostly dry after days of sunshine. Deanna left the wagon at the livery stable with instructions to have it ready by 4 o'clock, then made her way to Wilson's store to purchase the supplies she'd promised to bring back. Mr. Wilson greeted her warmly, inquiring after Robert's health and complimenting Deanna on her management of the situation. Mrs. Peterson says she doesn't know what she would have done without you, he told her as he wrapped the packages of dried beef and herbs for the special broth. Says you have a real way with children. Deanna accepted the compliment with a small smile. They're good children, it's easy to care for them. Not everyone would say so, Mr. Wilson observed shrewdly. Takes a special kind of patience, especially with little ones. By the time Deanna had completed her shopping, it was nearly 2 o'clock. She made her way to the hotel with a flutter of nerves in her stomach. This meeting with Mrs. Henderson could change the course of her life if she impressed the rancher's wife, if she secured the teaching position, if she found the courage to stand up to Samuel and Martha. Jack was waiting in the hotel lobby, dressed in clean clothes with his hair neatly combed. He looked different away from the ranch, still rugged, but with a polish that suggested he could move comfortably in more refined circles when necessary. "Miss Deanna," he greeted her, his eyes warming at the sight of her. "You look lovely." Deanna felt her cheeks flush with pleasure. "Thank you." "Is Mrs. Henderson here yet?" Jack nodded toward the dining room. "She's waiting for us." "Nervous, terrified," Deanna admitted with a small laugh. "What if she doesn't think I'm qualified?" "She will," Jack said with quiet confidence. "Just be yourself." Rebecca Henderson was not what Deanna had expected. Rather than the formidable matron she had imagined, Mrs. Henderson was a petite woman in her 40s with keen blue eyes and a no-nonsense manner that nonetheless radiated warmth. She rose as Deanna and Jack approached her table, extending her hand in greeting. "Mrs. Kincaid, what a pleasure to meet you at last. Jack has spoken very highly of your abilities." Deanna shook the offered hand, immediately liking the firm grip and direct gaze. "Thank you for considering me, Mrs. Henderson. I understand you're looking for someone to teach the children at the ranch." Over tea and sandwiches, they discussed the position in detail. There were 12 children at the ranch, ranging in age from 4 to 14, all in need of basic education. Mrs. Henderson had been attempting to teach them herself, but her duties as mistress of the ranch left little time for formal lessons. "What I need," she explained, "is someone who can establish a regular schedule, teach the fundamentals, and most importantly, instill a love of learning. These children will inherit ranches and businesses someday. They need to be prepared." Deanna found herself describing her experiences with her nieces and nephews, and more recently with the Peterson children. She spoke of Emma's quick mind, William's artistic talent, the games she had invented to make learning letters enjoyable for the younger ones. Mrs. Henderson listened attentively, occasionally asking a question or making a note in a small book she carried. Jack remained mostly silent, Though Deanna was acutely aware of his presence beside her, his quiet support bolstering her confidence. "Well," Mrs. Henderson said finally, closing her notebook with a decisive snap. "I think you're exactly what we need, Mrs. Kincaid. The position comes with room and board in the main house, plus a modest salary. Would that be acceptable to you?" Deanna could hardly believe what she was hearing. "Yes, absolutely, but I should mention my brother has already arranged a position for me in Denver. He may not be supportive of this change in plans." Mrs. Henderson's expression hardened slightly. "Your brother Samuel, correct." At Deanna's nod, she continued, "I know Samuel Kincaid, a good farmer but perhaps a bit rigid in his thinking. However, you are a grown woman and a widow. Legally, he has no authority over your decisions. In practice, it's not so simple," Deanna admitted. "I've been dependent on his charity since my husband's death." "Then perhaps it's time for that dependency to end," Mrs. Henderson said firmly. "The position is yours if you want it, Mrs. Kincaid. You can start as soon as your commitment to the Petersons is fulfilled." Deanna glanced at Jack, who nodded encouragingly. "I accept," she said, turning back to Mrs. Henderson, "and thank you for this opportunity. I won't disappoint you." Mrs. Henderson smiled, rising from the table. "I'm sure you won't. Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to attend to some other business in town." She extended her hand again. "Welcome to the Henderson Ranch, Mrs. Kincaid. I look forward to introducing you to the children." After Mrs. Henderson had departed, Deanna sat in stunned silence for a moment, barely able to process what had just happened. "She hired me," she said finally, looking at Jack with wide eyes. "Just like that." Jack's smile was warm with pride. "I told you she would." "Rebecca Henderson is an excellent judge of character, and she recognized your worth immediately." "Now I just have to tell Samuel and Martha," Deanna said, her euphoria dimming slightly at the thought of that confrontation. "Would you like me to come with you?" Jack offered. "I could speak to Samuel man to man, explain the situation." Deanna considered the offer, tempted by the thought of having Jack's solid presence beside her when she faced her brother. But know this was her battle to fight, her independence to claim. "Thank you, but I think I need to do this myself," she said finally. "Samuel needs to understand that this is my decision, not something I've been persuaded into by someone else." Jack nodded, respect evident in his gaze. "You're a remarkable woman, Deanna Kincaid." They left the hotel together, walking slowly toward the livery stable where Deanna's wagon waited. The afternoon sun was warm on their faces, the street busy with the usual Friday traffic of farmers and ranchers conducting their weekly business. "When will you tell your brother?" Jack asked as they reached the stable. "Soon," Deanna replied. "After Robert is fully recovered and my time with the Petersons is complete, I owe them that much." Jack helped her into the wagon, his hands strong and steady at her waist. When she was settled on the seat, he looked up at her with an expression so full of admiration and affection that Deanna felt her breath catch. "I'll be waiting," he said simply. "However long it takes." Deanna drove back to the Peterson farm with her mind and heart full. The future she had glimpsed seemed almost too good to be true, a position that valued her abilities, independence from Samuel and Martha's criticism, and Jack Grayson waiting patiently for her to find her footing in this new life. Yet as the wagon rattled along the familiar road, Deanna felt a growing certainty that this was right. For perhaps the first time in her life, she was making choices based on her own desires and capabilities, not on others' expectations or limitations. The thought was both terrifying and exhilarating. Robert's recovery continued steadily over the next week. By the following Friday, he was up and about, weak but improving daily. Mrs. Peterson, profuse in her gratitude, insisted that Deanna could return to her brother's farm with a clear conscience. "You've been a godsend," she repeated as Deanna packed her few belongings. "I don't know how we would have managed without you." Deanna smiled, touched by the genuine appreciation. "I was happy to help. The children are delightful." "They'll miss you terribly," Mrs. Peterson said, "especially little Mary. She's quite attached to you." Deanna thought of 4-year-old Mary, who had followed her around like a shadow for the past 2 weeks, eager for stories and songs. "I'll miss her too, all of them." Mrs. Peterson hesitated, then added, I hope this isn't presumptuous, but I heard from Rebecca Henderson that she's offered you a position teaching at the ranch. Deanna looked up, startled. News travels fast in Copper Creek. Indeed it does, Mrs. Peterson agreed with a smile. For what it's worth, I think you'll make a wonderful teacher. You have a gift with children. Thank you, Deanna said, deeply touched by the endorsement. That means a great deal coming from you. Samuel arrived to collect her mid-morning, his expression unreadable as he loaded her trunk into the wagon. Deanna bid a fond farewell to the Peterson family, promising to visit when she could, though she had no idea if that would be possible once she told Samuel of her plans. The ride back to the Kincaid farm was mostly silent, Samuel offering only brief comments about the weather and farm conditions. Deanna used the time to rehearse what she would say, how she would explain her decision in terms Samuel might understand and accept. At the farmhouse, Martha and the children greeted her with varying degrees of enthusiasm. Emma and Joseph threw themselves at her with delighted hugs, while Martha offered a cool nod of acknowledgement. We've managed well enough in your absence, Martha informed her as Deanna unpacked her things in the small back room, though the children have been asking for you constantly. Deanna smiled, pleased by this evidence that she'd been missed. They're good children. I've missed them too. That evening, after the children were in bed, Deanna steeled herself for the conversation she could no longer postpone. Samuel and Martha were sitting by the fire, he with his newspaper, she with her mending a scene of domestic tranquility that Deanna was about to disrupt. Samuel, Martha, she began, her voice steadier than she'd expected. I need to speak with you about something important. Samuel lowered his newspaper, eyebrows raised in mild surprise. What is it? Deanna took a deep breath. I've been offered a position as a teacher at the Henderson ranch. I've accepted. The silence that followed was absolute. Martha's needle froze mid-stitch, and Samuel's face underwent a rapid series of expressions: surprise, confusion, and finally anger. What nonsense is this? He demanded. You're going to Denver. The arrangements are made. I'm not going to Denver, Deanna said firmly. I'm grateful for all you've done for me, truly I am, but this position at the Henderson ranch is an opportunity I can't refuse. Martha found her voice sharp with disbelief. A teacher? You, what do you know about teaching? The dismissive tone would have crushed Deanna's confidence only weeks ago. Now, fortified by Mrs. Henderson's approval and Mrs. Peterson's endorsement, she simply smiled. Enough to be hired by Rebecca Henderson, who was a teacher herself before her marriage. She believes I have the necessary skills and temperament. Samuel set his newspaper aside with deliberate care. This is Grayson's doing, isn't it? He's behind this scheme. Jack introduced me to Mrs. Henderson, Deanna acknowledged, seeing no point in denial. But the decision to hire me was hers alone, based on her assessment of my abilities. And what abilities would those be? Martha asked with heavy sarcasm. You can barely manage a household, yet you think you can teach children? Deanna felt a flash of anger but kept her voice level. I've always been good with children. You've said so yourself, Martha, when it suited you to have me mind yours. And while I may not excel at milking cows or preserving vegetables, I am well-read, articulate, and patient. Those are the qualities Mrs. Henderson values for this position. Samuel studied her with narrowed eyes. And what of your obligations here? We took you in when you had nowhere else to go. We've fed and sheltered you. And I've worked hard in return, Deanna countered. I've cared for your children, cooked your meals, cleaned your house, and never complained, even when nothing I did met your standards. But I can't continue this way, Samuel. I need to make my own way in the world. With Grayson, Samuel said flatly. Don't bother denying it. This teaching position is just an excuse to be near him. Deanna shook her head. The position is real and it's important to me. As for Jack, yes, I care for him. He sees value in me that you and Martha have never acknowledged. He believes I'm capable of more than just being someone's servant or burden. Martha gasped at the implied criticism, but Samuel's expression grew thoughtful. You truly believe you can do this? Teach children? I do, Deanna said simply. I know I can. Samuel exchanged a long look with Martha, some silent communication passing between them. Finally, he turned back to Deanna. When would this position begin? Hope flickered in Deanna's chest. Was he actually considering the possibility? As soon as possible. Mrs. Henderson is eager to establish a regular schedule for the children. Samuel nodded slowly. And the terms, room, board, wages. Deanna explained the arrangement, watching as Samuel calculated the figures in his head. She could almost see him weighing the financial benefit of having one less mouth to feed against the loss of her labor in the household. "It's not what we planned," he said finally, "but the Hendersons are respectable people. If Rebecca Henderson believes you can teach, perhaps there's something to it." Deanna could hardly believe what she was hearing. "Then you don't object." "I didn't say that," Samuel cautioned. "I have serious reservations, particularly about Grayson's involvement." "But you're a grown woman, as Mrs. Henderson apparently reminded you. I can't force you to go to Denver if you're determined to stay." Martha made a sound of protest, but Samuel silenced her with a look. "However," he continued, "if this arrangement fails, if you find yourself unable to meet the Hendersons' expectations, don't expect to return here. You're choosing this path, Deanna. You'll have to live with the consequences." Deanna nodded, understanding the implicit threat but unmoved by it. "I understand, Samuel, and I appreciate your acceptance, limited though it is." Samuel returned to his newspaper, a clear dismissal. Martha resumed her mending with sharp, angry movements, her disapproval evident in every line of her body. Deanna retreated to her room, closing the door softly behind her. She had done it, stated her intentions, stood her ground, and secured, if not Samuel's blessing, at least his grudging acknowledgement of her right to choose her own path. She sat on her narrow cot, suddenly overcome by the enormity of what lay ahead. In a matter of days, she would leave this house for good, beginning a new life at the Henderson Ranch. She would be responsible for the education of 12 children, expected to establish routines, design lessons, and measure progress. It was daunting, yet exhilarating, and Jack would be there, patient and supportive, waiting for her to find her footing before expecting anything more. The thought brought a warm glow to her chest, a feeling of possibility she hadn't experienced in years. That night, Deanna wrote in her journal until her candle burned low, recording every detail of the day's events and her hopes for the future. As she finally closed the book and prepared for sleep, a line from Tennyson's Ulysses came back to her, fitting her situation perfectly: to strive, to seek, to find, and not to yield. She had strived and sought, and now she had found a path forward. She would not yield to doubt or fear or others' limited expectations. She would forge ahead, creating a life of her own, choosing a life with purpose, dignity, and perhaps, in time, love. The following week passed in a whirlwind of preparation and farewells. The children, especially Emma, were devastated to learn of Deanna's imminent departure, though somewhat consoled by her promise that they could visit her at the Henderson Ranch. "You'll be a real teacher," Emma said with wonder. "Like in the books." Deanna smiled, hugging the girl close. "I'll do my best, and I'll write to you, telling you all about my new students and the lessons we're learning." Samuel remained distant but civil, apparently resigned to Deanna's decision. Martha, however, made little effort to hide her disapproval, her manner frosty as she instructed Deanna on which items she could take and which belonged to the household. On Deanna's final morning at the Kincaid farm, a wagon arrived from the Henderson Ranch to transport her and her belongings. To her surprise and delight, Jack himself was driving. "Mr. Grayson," Samuel acknowledged stiffly, coming out to the yard as Jack loaded Deanna's trunk. "I trust you'll see my sister safely to her new position." Jack met Samuel's gaze steadily. "You have my word on that, Mr. Kincaid." Mrs. Henderson is looking forward to Deanna's arrival. The formality of the exchange amused Deanna. Both men pretending this was a purely professional arrangement when everyone involved knew otherwise. But she appreciated Jack's restraint. Antagonizing Samuel would serve no purpose now that her departure was assured. The goodbyes were brief and mostly tearful on the children's part. Martha offered a stiff embrace, whispering a final warning. Remember what Samuel said. If this fails, you've chosen your path. Deanna nodded, beyond taking offense at Martha's lack of faith. I'll remember. Thank you for everything, Martha. Samuel's farewell was equally reserved, though Deanna thought she detected a flicker of something like respect in his eyes as he helped her into the wagon. Good luck, Deanna. I hope you find what you're looking for. Thank you, Samuel, Deanna replied, genuinely touched by this unexpected sentiment. I hope so too. As the wagon pulled away, Deanna looked back at the farmhouse where she had spent the past 6 months and many years of her childhood before that. Despite the difficulties and disappointments, it had been home, a place of shelter if not always of comfort. Now she was leaving it behind, perhaps forever. Having second thoughts? Jack asked quietly, noting her pensive expression. Deanna shook her head. No, just acknowledging that one chapter is ending as another begins. Jack smiled, his eyes crinkling at the corners in the way she had come to cherish. A poet's way of looking at it. Perhaps Mrs. Henderson hired the right person after all, Deanna said with a small laugh. I do have a fondness for words. Among your many admirable qualities, Jack agreed, his tone warm with affection. The journey to the Henderson ranch took most of the morning, the wagon following winding trails through rolling hills covered with early spring grass. As they crested a final rise, Deanna caught her first glimpse of her new home, a sprawling ranch house surrounded by barns, corrals, and bunkhouses, with snow-capped mountains rising majestically in the distance. It's beautiful, she breathed, taking in the scene. Wait until you see it in summer, Jack said, pride evident in his voice. The valley turns green as emeralds and wildflowers cover the hills. Mrs. Henderson met them at the main house, welcoming Deanna with genuine warmth. We're so pleased you've joined us, Mrs. Kincaid. The children are beside themselves with excitement, their first real teacher. Deanna was shown to her room, a cozy space with a real bed, a desk for lesson planning, and a window overlooking a small garden. It was simple but comfortable, and entirely her own, no cramped back room, no narrow cot, no sense of imposition or burden. I'll leave you to settle in, Mrs. Henderson said. Dinner is at 6 and you'll meet the children then. We'll discuss your duties more fully tomorrow, but I thought you might appreciate a quiet evening to adjust. Left alone, Deanna unpacked her few possessions, arranging her books on the small shelf beside the desk and placing Thomas's photograph on the bedside table. She had loved him in her way and would always honor his memory. But as she smoothed her hand over the quilt on her new bed, Deanna acknowledged that Thomas belonged to her past. Her future lay here in this place with these people who valued her for qualities Thomas had never fully recognized. The next few weeks were a blur of activity as Deanna established routines for her new pupils. The schoolroom, a converted storage building near the main house, was basic but functional, with desks for the children and a blackboard for lessons. Deanna threw herself into the work with enthusiasm, discovering a talent for explanation and a patience for repetition that served her well with the diverse group of learners. Mrs. Henderson proved to be an invaluable mentor, offering advice and encouragement when Deanna encountered challenges. The children, initially shy with their new teacher, quickly warmed to her storytelling approach to history and her interactive methods for teaching arithmetic and spelling. Jack kept a respectful distance during this adjustment period, understanding Deanna's need to establish herself independently. They saw each other daily at meals, during ranch activities, occasionally passing on the paths between buildings, but their interactions remained friendly and somewhat formal, at least in public. In private moments, however, when they happened to meet by the creek that ran behind the main house or found themselves alone in the small ranch library, their conversation flowed more freely, revealing the growing connection between them. How are the lessons going? Jack asked one evening in late April, finding Deanna sitting alone on the porch after dinner, a book of poetry open on her lap. Better than I expected, Deanna admitted, making room for him on the bench beside her. The children are eager to learn, even little Sarah, who can barely hold a pencil. And Mrs. Henderson has been so supportive, providing materials and suggestions whenever I need them. Jack smiled, his eyes warm in the fading light. You've found your calling, I think. The children adore you. They're wonderful, Deanna agreed. Even when they're difficult, they're wonderful. She glanced at him curiously. And your cabin, how is the construction progressing? Slowly but surely, Jack said with satisfaction. The walls are up, the roof is on. I'm working on the interior now, floors, shelves, the things that make a house a home. Deanna tried to picture it, a small cabin nestled in the pines, smoke curling from the chimney, perhaps flowers in a garden someday. It sounds lovely. It will be, Jack agreed, when it's ready. The unspoken implication hung between them, ready for her if she chose to share it with him. As spring gave way to summer, Deanna settled more deeply into her role at the Henderson ranch. Her confidence grew with each successful lesson, each small triumph with a struggling student. She began to develop her own teaching methods, adapting Mrs. Henderson's suggestions to suit the particular needs of her pupils. The ranch itself became familiar territory, the paths between buildings, the rhythm of daily activities, the personalities of the various hands and household staff. Deanna found herself welcomed into this community with a warmth and acceptance she had never experienced at Samuel's farm. Jack remained a steady, supportive presence throughout these months of adjustment. He never pushed for more than Deanna was ready to give, never presumed upon the understanding that existed between them. But his feelings were evident in 100 small ways, the books of poetry that appeared on her desk, the wildflower bouquets that mysteriously materialized in her classroom, the way his eyes followed her across a room. On a warm evening in late June, Deanna sat on her favorite bench near the creek, watching the sunset paint the distant mountains in shades of gold and purple. The school term had ended for the summer, though she would continue working with a few of the children who needed extra attention. The past 3 months had been the happiest of her adult life, challenging, yes, but deeply satisfying in a way she had never experienced before. Mind if I join you? Jack's voice broke into her reverie. Deanna looked up with a smile, patting the bench beside her. Please do. Jack sat, removing his hat and placing it on his knee. Penny for your thoughts. I was just reflecting on how much has changed since March, Deanna said, gazing at the sunset. Sometimes I can hardly believe I'm the same person who lived in that little back room at Samuel's farm, convinced I was useless. Jack's expression darkened. You were never useless, they just couldn't see your worth. Perhaps, Deanna acknowledged, or perhaps I needed to discover it for myself. She turned to face him fully. Either way, I'm grateful to you for helping me find this path. Jack shook his head. You found it yourself, Deanna. I just pointed out a few signposts along the way. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching as the first stars appeared in the deepening blue of the eastern sky. Deanna was acutely aware of Jack beside her, his clean, masculine scent, the warmth radiating from his body, the gentle rhythm of his breathing. My cabin is finished, Jack said finally, his voice quiet in the gathering dusk. I moved in last week. Deanna nodded, having heard this news from Mrs. Henderson. I'm glad you've worked so hard on it. I'd like you to see it, Jack continued, a note of uncertainty in his voice that Deanna had never heard before. When you're ready. Deanna understood the significance of the invitation. After months of patient waiting, Jack was asking her to take the next step to acknowledge the future they might have together. I'd like that, she said softly. Perhaps this Sunday after church. Jack's smile was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. Sunday would be perfect. True to his word, Jack collected Deanna after the Sunday service in the small chapel on the Henderson property. They rode together on his horse, Deanna seated comfortably in front of him, his arms around her waist as he guided the animal along familiar trails. The cabin was everything Deanna had imagined, and more, a sturdy structure nestled among tall pines, with a wide porch and windows that caught the morning light. Inside, Jack had created a home that reflected his character, simple but well-crafted, with practical furnishings and a few touches of unexpected beauty, like the carved mantelpiece above the stone fireplace. It's wonderful, Jack, Deanna said sincerely as he showed her through the main room and the small kitchen beyond. You've done beautiful work. Jack watched her face carefully as she explored, noting what pleased her, what drew her attention. There's one more room, he said, leading her to a door off the main living area. The bedroom was modest but comfortable, with a bed large enough for two, a chest of drawers, and a small dressing table beneath a window. What caught Deanna's eye, however, was the bookshelf built into the wall opposite the bed, filled with volumes of poetry, history, and fiction. For rainy afternoons and winter evenings, Jack explained, following her gaze, I hoped you might enjoy having your books close at hand. Deanna turned to him, her heart full to bursting with the realization of what he had done. He had built this home with her in mind, creating spaces that would welcome and comfort her, anticipating her needs and desires with thoughtful care. Jack, she said softly, unable to find words adequate to the moment. He moved closer, taking her hands in his. I meant what I said that day in town, Deanna. You're priceless to me, not for what you can do, but for who you are, your kindness, your courage, your gentle heart. He took a deep breath. I love you. I think I've loved you since that first day at Whitaker's store when you stood your ground despite his attempt to cheat you. Deanna felt tears well in her eyes, but they were tears of joy, not sorrow. I love you too, she whispered, the words coming easily now that the moment had arrived. You saw me when no one else did. You believed in me when even I doubted myself. Jack raised one hand to cup her cheek, his touch reverent. Deanna Kincaid, will you marry me? Will you make this cabin a home with me? Yes, Deanna said simply, her heart too full for elaborate speeches. Yes, I will. Jack's kiss was gentle at first, a question rather than a demand. Deanna answered with her own certainty, her arms winding around his neck as the kiss deepened into a promise of all they would share in the years to come. They were married on a perfect July morning, with the mountains standing witness and the Henderson family in attendance. Deanna wore a new dress of pale blue silk, a gift from Mrs. Henderson, with wildflowers in her hair and her mother's locket around her neck. Jack stood tall and proud beside the minister, his eyes never leaving Deanna's face as they exchanged their vows. When he slipped the simple gold band onto her finger, his hands were steady, his voice clear and certain as he pledged his love and fidelity. To Deanna's surprise, Samuel and the children attended the ceremony, arriving just as it was about to begin. Martha had remained at home, apparently unwilling to give even tacit approval to the match, but Samuel's presence was an unexpected gesture of reconciliation. You look happy, he told Deanna gruffly at the small reception afterward. Happier than I've seen you since we were children. I am happy, Deanna confirmed, touched by his observation. Happier than I ever thought possible, Samuel nodded, clearly uncomfortable with emotional conversations but making an effort nonetheless. Then I'm glad for you. Jack seems like a good man. The best, Deanna agreed, watching as her new husband entertained Emma and Joseph with some story that had them giggling uncontrollably. The children insisted on coming, Samuel added, following her gaze. They've missed you terribly. Deanna smiled, warmed by this evidence of the children's affection. I've missed them too. They're welcome to visit whenever you can spare them. Perhaps for a week this summer, they could join my lessons with the ranch children. Samuel considered this, then nodded slowly. They'd like that. And it would give Martha a rest. She's expecting again, you know. Deanna hadn't known, and the news gave her a pang of something like regret for the family connection that had frayed so badly. Congratulations, Samuel. I'm happy for you both. After the guests had departed and the Hendersons had tactfully retired to the main house, Jack carried Deanna across the threshold of their cabin with exaggerated care, making her laugh despite the nervous anticipation fluttering in her stomach. Welcome home, Mrs. Grayson, he said, setting her gently on her feet in the main room. Deanna looked around at the home they would share, the comfortable furniture, the shelves of books, the fresh wildflowers in a vase on the table. Everything spoke of Jack's thoughtfulness, his desire to create not just a house but a haven for them both. It's perfect, she said, meaning far more than just the cabin. Everything is perfect. Later, as they lay together in the quiet darkness of their bedroom, Deanna marveled at the path that had brought her to this moment. From a widow deemed useless by her family to a respected teacher and beloved wife, it was a transformation she could never have imagined on that cold day in Copper Creek when she'd first encountered Jack Grayson. "What are you thinking?" Jack murmured, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. Deanna smiled in the darkness, nestling closer to her husband's warmth. "I was thinking about value," she said softly, "about how we measure worth in this world." Jack's arm tightened around her. "And what conclusion have you reached, Mrs. Grayson?" "That true value isn't in what we can do or produce," Deanna said thoughtfully. "It's in how we love and are loved in return. It's in the moments we choose courage over fear, kindness over indifference." She turned in his arms to face him, though she could barely make out his features in the dim light. "You taught me that, Jack. When you said I was priceless to you, you weren't just offering comfort to a wounded spirit. You were speaking a deeper truth that I needed to learn for myself." Jack's kiss was tender, a wordless affirmation of all she had said. "You were always priceless," he whispered against her lips. "You just needed someone to remind you." As Deanna drifted towards sleep in the circle of her husband's arms, she felt a sense of completion, of having found not just a place to belong but a person with whom to share the journey. Whatever challenges tomorrow might bring, she would face them with Jack beside her, secure in the knowledge that she was valued not for what she could do, but for who she was, a woman of courage, compassion, and limitless worth. In the years that followed, Deanna and Jack built a life rich with purpose and joy. Deanna continued teaching at the Henderson ranch, expanding her small school to include children from neighboring properties. Jack worked as Henderson's foreman, respected for his fairness and skill with horses. Their cabin grew with their family, first one addition for a proper study, where Deanna could prepare her lessons, then another for the nursery when their son, Thomas, was born 2 years after their marriage. Emma and the other Kincaid children became regular visitors, spending weeks each summer at the cabin, where Deanna taught them alongside her ranch pupils. Even Samuel mellowed over time, his gruff manner giving way to grudging respect for the life Deanna and Jack had created together. On their 5th wedding anniversary, as they sat on their porch watching Thomas chase fireflies in the summer twilight, Jack took Deanna's hand in his touch as tender as it had been on their first meeting. "Any regrets, Mrs. Grayson?" he asked, his eyes reflecting the golden light of sunset. Deanna smiled, leaning her head against his shoulder. "Not one," she said with absolute certainty. "Not a single one," and it was true. The path had not always been easy, but it had led her here to this man, this child, this life of purpose and love. From useless to priceless, from dependent to self-reliant, from silenced to heard, Deanna's journey had transformed her in ways she once would not have believed possible. As Thomas ran to them, laughing with the pure joy of childhood, Deanna gathered him into her arms, grateful beyond words for the family they had created and the love that sustained them all. This, she knew with bone-deep certainty, was what it meant to be truly priceless, to love and be loved, completely and without condition, for exactly who you are.